The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Brian, Miss Berlin, Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security. Hi.
Hey, hey.
Hey, hey. Gods. So we're recording this on 1 March. Everybody missed Leap Day yesterday, so we're in the brand new month of March. This is a couple weeks old, so things might change. But how about that coronavirus? Is that causing anybody any problems at work?
Not yet.
That's good. That's good. It's actually causing me problems because
you're closer to California or whatever.
Well. As of yesterday, the first death happened in the county that I'm living in up here in Seattle. So hopefully it will get better. But I'm just doing all the anti-hackery things, washing my hands, taking a shower, doing all the hygiene stuff. So yeah, that's understood. Wow. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and sorry, I just got told.
For those of you listening.
Yeah, I just got told today that some people don't listen to podcasts because there's not enough information condensed in the short amount of time. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring our person of the week and a couple weeks in.
Is that your nice way of saying we bullshit too much in the beginning?
Apparently so. And this was just general podcastery, not my own, but I felt like I needed to do that. So this gentleman really needs no introduction. He's released things like the Social Engineering Toolkit, Pentester Framework. He is the namesake of the Kennedy Center. Apparently, where they do all that cool stuff in Washington, D.C. It's named after him. It's Dave Kennedy, everybody. Welcome, Dave.
Woo! Hey, thanks, Brian. Woo! Thank you all for having me. Really appreciate it. And this is my second attempt, right? Because their first scheduling had issues. So I appreciate you all accommodating my schedule and having me on. So I'm so excited to be here.
Oh no, that's cool.
Yeah.
We just shove a news story or news podcast in there. Some people are like, there's too many interviews, and we're like, that's what people want to hear. They don't want to hear us talking about the news. Every other podcast can do that, So we appreciate you coming on.
I just want to say for the record, though, that everybody here is wearing a fanboy Dave Kennedy company. So Brian, number one, is wearing a OG BDS Vision t-shirt. That was like year one from McDouglas.
Right.
Brian, number two, sorry, not the dude number one, number two, is wearing a binary defense old school shield, which is probably year number 3 of us being in business. And then Amanda is wearing a TrustedSec
from this year.
Actually, no. Year. So that's 2 years ago. That's before we had the binary around the side. So now we have a circular logo. So that's 2 years ago.
Caroline gives me a lot of TrustedSec swag, so
it's nice having friends and hookups, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But thank you all for coming out here and wearing the different shirts. I appreciate it. It's very humbling.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So, Dave, of course, is not the namesake of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. It does sound good, though.
You know for sure?
Maybe, I don't know. He's doing a lot of cool stuff these days, so maybe they decided, secretly to name it after him. We're just, different Kennedys.
You can't prove a negative, so there's that.
Yep, that's true. That's absolutely true. We'll actually talk about the Dave Kennedy Center later on, but one thing I wanted to. There might be somebody out there who's listening to the podcast for the first time. I just did a talk yesterday at UW Tacoma talking about risk management and assessing risk and mitigating risk. They didn't fall asleep, so that was good. But Dave, could you just give people a quick talk about, how you got to where you are, superstar in the rock star InfoSec thought leader?
Don't drop that word.
Oh God, Amanda, you're right. Can't drop the R word here. Come on.
No, we don't do rock stars on the show. So, tell people about yourself a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dave Kennedy. I started my career off about 20 years ago, which means I'm getting old AF. So I started off my career. I went to high school at a place called Bedford High School, which we'll talk a little about later. And I almost failed out of high school, and I joined the United States Marine Corps in the intelligence agency. And it's funny, one of my friends, Sean Sullivan, grew up with him as a kid. I said, listen, man, I'm getting a top secret clearance. This means I can probably understand what's happening with aliens. if I call you at like 2 a.m. from Hawaii and I say, hey, man, yes, and I hang up the phone, there's aliens. They exist. And I never called them because I don't know. And so I got more into cybersecurity. I got out. I worked for a small consulting company for a few years. I joined a company called Diebold, which I became their chief security officer. I want to throw out there from a caveat perspective that I came in after the voting machine issues that happened with them. And I helped build their cybersecurity program. I am very much on the technical side. I wrote the Social Engineer Toolkit, Magic Unicorn, which is an exploitation framework for PowerShell. Co-author of the book Metasploit, the Penetration Tester's Guide. I think I'm getting some feedback.
Mm-hmm. Echo.
Okay, that's Echo's gone. Good. I've really been in the security space now. I do CNN, Fox, CNBC, MSNBC. I testified in front of Congress twice. My whole thing is really focusing on progressing security to a different state to help people out. I started companies called TrustedSec and Binary Defense, which we focus on consulting and monitoring and detection. And really my whole goal, and I started DerbyCom as well with a number of other fantastic folks, which RIP is now no longer available. But we have a number of other conferences spawning off, kind of taking the torch. So that's a little bit of my background. My whole goal since I started, interesting enough, is I saw a lot of people like the Shmoo Group, Cult of Dead Cows, Phil Zimmerman, all those people just doing amazing things. And they were just the coolest people in the world. And I always just want to learn from them and to figure out my experiences and try to make security different because they did the same thing. And, Mudge, not Raphael Mudge, but Mudge from CDC. And I just looked at them as being kind of my mentors, kind of growing up as a kid, and really tried to make the world a better place.
Very cool. All right. So a little background on why we were going to do this. We are actually going to, full disclosure, we were going to do this with McDouglas and a gentleman, I believe, from Mandiant about the first of the year, because the big Twitter blew up, happened around Christmas time. And of course, I didn't want to spread ill will or anything around the world around Christmas time, so we decided to delay that, and I wasn't in a good headspace either. So I told Mick, "Hey, sorry, dude, don't think it's probably a good time to do that. We'll wait for everything to die down." It all started with somebody who re-released PowerShell Empire in Python, which it seems kind of counterproductive. It's PowerShell with PowerShell and Python, and somebody on Twitter, and I won't call him out, but he'll be in the show notes if you want to go look that one up, said, we believe PowerShell and Empire frameworks will remain a major threat vector employed by APTs, malware authors, and red teams. In big capital letters says, so why are you updating it? You're improving capabilities you explicitly say are used by bad guys. Scottie, beam me up from this bizarro world. And then it just blew up from there. People got involved, hurt feelings. You had trolls. You had people talking about it on both sides. And I thought, well, let's have a show about it. And then it was like, yeah, that's a little too hot to touch right now. So let's cool it off. So Dave, the question to get to my point here is, as somebody who releases or has released tools that enable both the good guys and the bad guys, what was your take on this whole thing that happened?
I largely stayed away from it from a Twitter perspective because I think Twitter is a very imperfect system for debating large, complex topics, right? Because this is a very complex situation that we're dealing with here. I've been in the industry for 20 years. Okay. So I'm getting old, and there is definitely room for differences of opinion, differences for challenging things, new people coming to the industry and seeing things in a different light. What's interesting is, when I started in this industry, dropping 0 days were a street credibility thing. It was looked upon as like, hey, you drop a 0 day, you're awesome, you're elite, you're amazing. That's friggin' awesome. You are the smartest person in the world, right? And what we realized very quickly, and this actually came from Dan Kaminsky when he really tried to develop the responsible disclosure perspective, where you have a 0 day, you have something that could impact large masses of technological breadth in the whole world, you should probably work with the vendors on releasing a fix and getting a release out and helping out in a way that makes the world a better place, right? And I do credit Dan for that. Dan at around the same time got hacked. All of his information got published.
I remember that.
You know, and all this stuff started happening during this period of time. With tool releases, it's an interesting debate. I have the credit of giving the very first ever PowerShell security talk. It was at DEF CON 12 or 13. I can't remember which one it was. But it was when PowerShell beta first came out. And Jeff Snover, who was one of the foundational people for creating PowerShell, and Lee Holmes at the time, and a bunch of others, you know, they released PowerShell, and it really didn't have a substantial amount of security built into it because it was basically a full-fledged programming language into the operating system itself. And what changed is that, you know, I came out with this talk saying it was called PowerShell OMFG with one of my good friends, Josh. And we created this thing and basically saying, like, listen, you release this to all of the Windows operating systems, you're gonna have some problems because everybody now has a full-fledged programming language at your fingertips. And what was interesting is, we released some proof of concepts, very childish at the time, but I released something called Power Dump, which I thought was really funny. And we basically released all these tools that you could do, like reverse shells. You could bypass execution restriction policies at the time, which allowed you to get remote code execution. And from there, it really birthed the PowerShell security movement. And you saw attackers come out with it, but they would have came out with that in the first place in any way, shape, or form. You have a full-fledged programming language. Attackers would have abused and used it in the same time. Things like Powershell Empire came out. And what happened is the full disclosure of that created a whole industry around PowerShell security. Microsoft changed their perspective and said, listen, we need to figure out a way to restrict this, constrain language mode, for example, script block logging, integration into the anti-malware scan interface. And what happened is, if you look at PowerShell from 2011, 2012 to today, PowerShell is actually one of the most secure programming languages that are out there if you implement what Microsoft recommends. And so you have the ability to restrict PowerShell in a way that makes it very difficult for you to get remote code execution, to get information off of the system itself directly from PowerShell, to detect PowerShell exploitation. And so what occurred is a complete change in how Microsoft viewed and how they secured PowerShell in the first place. However, you can make the argument that by me going out and talking about PowerShell the very first time in an exploitation fashion, created a whole industry around organized crime and hacking in the first place. And so the problem you now run into from a dilemma perspective, and I understand Andrew, I understand everybody's perspective on a lot of different fronts. But to me, releasing offensive tooling may have a short-term monumental impact in commoditized type attacks, but in the long term makes a very much a differential long-term protection around what we're doing as an industry. And that's the debate is are you doing more harm than good? And I think, what we really need to look at is trying to figure out a way to balance the two to come to a conclusion to make the products better.
Whenever somebody like Daniel Bohannon comes out with DOSfuscation or something like that, I can see in the criminal element, the malware that I get in, they're using those techniques probably 3 to 9 months after he comes out with that at DerbyCon, let's say. So I see that coming out in the wild, and it takes a few weeks for the security vendors to come out with signatures to detect those, right? So I do see it happening, although belated, in the corporate world. So I think that's a good thing that the security vendors are also taking this seriously because they have to. They're being held accountable as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I respect Andrew's position. I respect people that have a difference of view on releasing tools and the damages that it incurs. My biggest thing that I have as a detractor to those arguments is that Microsoft has substantially upped their game because of the security research industry. They have Apple has substantially increased their security because of the research industry. the overall good that we have accomplished through the tooling has made it substantially harder and actually shifted how we view attacks in an organization. 10 years ago, we would go into a company and we would do a pen test and we would just destroy them. Like hands down, DA everything, fully have access to all their infrastructure. And you know what? That team would take there and they'd say, okay, I need to fix MS-0867. I need to fix this. I need to fix the SQL injection. And the next year we'd own them 30 ways to Sunday a different way, right? And what happened is the shift changed drastically from, well, no organization has a perfect vulnerability management program. Can we look at how an attack occurs and start to prevent and detect them in different phases? And that has made a very big difference. You look at the whole MITRE attack framework as an example. And the MITRE attack framework literally takes 80% of it is research. Literally 80% of the technique sections breaking down from initial access all the way to the exfiltration of data all comes from the research side of the house, because we have discovered new ways of attacking. Russia uses it. China uses it. All these different areas. Yes, we can use threat intelligence from other organizations to figure out how adversaries are using capabilities. But what we have done is actually mapped out ways that attackers could have compromised your organization, because we've looked at pre-existing breaches or research that has concluded that area. And we've actually mapped out ways that we can get better at responding to those threats. And so you look at it and you say, listen, we have made the industry better. Are we going to be able to help companies that do not invest in security? No. Are we going to be able to help companies that neglect security in every way as part of doing IT as a business? No. But can we, the whole movement is moving towards cloud. You move to Azure, AWS. All those companies have built in different monitoring and detection capabilities for all those individual areas because of that industry, because of the tooling of PowerShell Empire or Cobalt Strike or Unicorn or social engineer toolkit or whatever. They have made their whole infrastructure better because of that tooling, and they would not have done that unless other people have done that in the first place.
Yep.
Now, from a criminal element perspective, how much of the research and development on these attacks is done by them, and how much is done by the good guys, the white hats? Right? Because we all know they take these techniques and use them, but are they really developing these things on their own as well? I mean, do you get the question here? What percentage of these attacks actually come from the good guys?
It's absolutely a mixture. Now, when we publish things like, hey, Emotet is doing this because we reverse engineered it and here's the technique, obviously the folks that read Emotet are going to be like, well, hey, I need to change this in order to get around the different techniques, right? And as we build layers, what I can say is that over the past 5 years, we have gotten so much better at monitoring detection and prevention. Like oodles different. Our red teams now have to build their own capabilities and simulate different adversaries using customized tooling. That type of stuff was never on the shelf 10 years ago. So we have gotten so much better at what we do from a defensive perspective. Now, what I can say is that from an organized crime perspective, adversary perspective, attackers are absolutely going to use things that are open source, things that researchers do, knowing that there's a shelf life for those, for example, but they're also going to develop their own capabilities and tooling. So we've seen a mixture of the both. Can I give you a percentage? Not necessarily. But what I can say is that they will use all of the above. Ways that they can shortcut, they're absolutely going to shortcut. If there's already something that's been developed, they're going to use that. So there's absolutely the possibility that things can be used maliciously, abused from a researcher's perspective. But at the same time, there's a very big mixture of that happening kind of across the board.
Yeah, and I think if you just start talking about it and getting more eyes on it, it's going to help. It's going to benefit everybody anyways, from either creating detections or, fixing whatever software is vulnerable. And who says they're not already doing
in the first place?
Yeah, and we just don't know about it.
Yep, absolutely agree.
Yeah. So, that was my next question about shining a light on these things. But the technology and everything moves so quickly, right? Once we've can detect PowerShell Empire, once we can detect PowerShell use in the environment, the attackers are still they're gonna morph and change, and we're just still kind of playing catch up in many cases, right?
Well, yes and no. So look at the Shitrix issue that happened recently, right? And Shitrix is a great example because there was a vulnerability that came out, and this is very much different than tooling. Okay, I want to differentiate the lines there. So there's a direct exploit that came out that could impact over 50,000 assets that were not patched at the time because they didn't really look at a criticality perspective from Shitrix itself. Now you can fault them for not having a good risk assessment process, risk profiling across the organization, vulnerability management program across the organization. At the same time, Citrix's responses was really, really bad. They're like, hey, we don't have a patch, but hey, here's some commands you can run in your environment, and it probably will work, right? And so it was a really bad response from a Shitrix perspective. But at the same time, the criticality really wasn't factored into a lot of companies. And in that point in time, there's direct damage that can be caused because of those specific exploits or exposures. And there was a company that released the exploit itself, a proof of concept that had not been prior released. Now, we at TrustedSec had that exploit ready to go over a week long. And it was fully working, remote code execution, had proven everything from it. But we didn't release it because we didn't want to damage the entire world around Citrix exposures over 50,000 people. And so when the folks released the Shitrix exploit, we also released ours, and we also released a scanner that can check it, and we also released how to check for the compromise itself on Citrix Nextcare. So we really try to focus on responsible disclosure during those periods of time. So when there's a potential for very extensive damages because people aren't patching, that's one thing. When you look at tooling, you look at command and control infrastructure. One thing that I recently wrote a few years ago was called Trevor C2. Trevor, rest in peace, my friend from Smashburger. But when you look at Trevor C2, there was no virus signatures in that written for several years. And recently, Microsoft Defender recently released a signature. Now, let me explain the bypass technique for Trevor C2. I recently checked it out. It was like a month ago. They released a signature update, and there was a line in my code called encrypted stream equals, and it had an encrypted stream cipher for handling encrypted AES ciphers back and forth. What I did is I changed an encrypted stream equals to encrypted streams equals, and that completely circumvented the Windows Defender signature that was released for that. That is garbage. That is not a way to rely on detection. That is not a way to protect your infrastructure from any type of threats. There are things that we need to do to really increase the bar. So from a tooling perspective, we need to get the information out there to help others test. And that's a big thing too, is that we don't have things like with ByteBleeder releasing new tools and Benjamin Delphi giving us assets to be able to test tooling with Mimikatz and what he does with everything else. We as defenders do not have the ability to test effectively what adversaries would do in the first place. And it really limits us on our tooling or capabilities of what we can do from a simulation perspective. There's a lot of great research being out there, and I'm a full advocate of getting that information out there so that we can get better at it, knowing that it can be used by adversaries and knowing that it can be used for malicious purposes, but we're trying to build a better state for tomorrow. And yes, there will be collateral damage. Yes, there will be things that happen where companies get hacked. But at the end of the day, we will be better off as it goes along because we have this capability out there.
Would you argue the fact or the release of offensive security tools actually created the need to have an endpoint security industry?
I couldn't agree more. You look at what EDR products do today, endpoint detection and response tools do today, which is a major major piece of detecting, right? And you look at traditional antivirus. Antivirus, as we know it, is dead, right? But yet everybody still uses it because it's a safety mechanism that is used by PCI and a number of other organizations to try to home in on what a traditional endpoint detection is. And you look at what EDRs have done, and what they have done is they said, listen, we know that there are bypasses out there. We know that there's new tooling. We know that there's new research. We know that there's new adversaries. What we're going to try to do is map out all the different phases of an attack and try to detect in different phases of those to help better respond so you can minimize the damage out there. And that really is due to what we have done today, the tooling. You look at any product out there, I don't care what product it is, but they are looking for Metasploit. They are looking for, unicorn. They're looking for all these tools because they can be abused in a number of cases. And companies really need to focus on shoring up those defenses to get better at what they do.
Right. Yeah. And, like you said, it's not just, Metasploit. People are creating, custom, listeners, custom, shells back and everything. So yeah, the need to be able to, detect these things is very important. Let me see what.
One thing I'll say is the latest Emotet just included a new way of scanning. So when it affects a host, what it'll do is it'll actually scan for all the open Wi-Fi networks, and it'll actually try to brute force those keys, and then from there it'll spread to those networks and try to spread Emotet. That was not from a researcher. That was from the Emotet developers, and one of our folks, James Quinn, called Q at Binary Defense. He found that protocol and actually published all that information publicly to try to help people figure it out. Guess what the detection rate was for that Emotet variant when it got published to VirusTotal?
Not very good. Or
0 out of 60.
Oh,
0 out of 60.
Wow. Okay.
That's our current defenses today, my friends.
Good Lord.
I'm not surprised.
You don't need to worry about tooling. You need to worry about everything else that's being published out there that those shitty vendors, pardon my language, are publishing out there to find 0 out of 60. Is this a PC friendly?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Miss Berlin blows that every week. Miss Berlin blows that every week.
Every now and then we need the explicit rating, depending on what we talk about.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's total crap because you look at the behavior that Emotet's exhibiting, it is truly malware in its core text. And literally 0 out of 60 are defending against it. That is garbage.
Well,
garbage.
You would argue that even if it was, 60 out of 60, there'd still be people that have issues with configuration, making sure that their EDRs actually, notice those things, make sure that their log agents are actually being deployed.
That they have EDR in general.
Right,
Yeah.
Right. If there's, God forbid, they're still using McAfee antivirus or something like that, then, it's almost like, I hate to say they're asking for it, but they're just, I don't willfully ignorant in some cases. So
that's actually, Brian, that is the debate to its core, right? Do you protect the companies that do not do security in conjunction with doing IT?
You can't.
Or do you try to make the overall strategic plan for all these companies that produce the technology, that produce what we use today on a daily basis to get better?
That's right.
And that is actually the core of the debate. Right. Can you save everybody along that is just doing really, really bad security? Or can you make everybody else better because you are doing phenomenal research to make the industry better?
That's right.
And that goes down to the core of what the folks at CDC, the Call to the Cows were doing, which is a Shmoo group, and they're releasing new exploits and tools and tactics and techniques. I remember looking at, there was a picture, there was a video that came out from the CDC that released Back Orifice, right? And there was a question in the audience that there was a gentleman in the audience said, well, what the hell do we do now? And
what you've been doing.
Right. And the response back from the CDC, and granted, I'm not condoning this in any way, was take your shirt off and let's see your boobs. And it was a guy, right? The guy was kind of overweight at the time. And this is not appropriate in today's age of what you deal with. But, the response back from that was release and F the world, right? Today, it's very different in the fact that we look at it and we say, well, is there direct harm that could be accomplished today in that sense? And is there ways for us to work with defenders to make it better? But can we also make the industry better by releasing these tools and helping others out? And that is the core of the debate is are we causing more harm than good when we release these type of things? And again, I'm not condoning the CDC of the 90s and the time period of that and what they said to the individual. What I'm explaining is that the mindset was, if we release this, people will get better. And honestly, that bet with the CDC paid off because Microsoft took a very interesting approach. They started focusing on security. Granted, we laughed at them during those periods of time. they have taken a completely different approach. I'm not saying they're perfect in any way. They're a great example is living off land binaries and scripts. Instead of fixing the issue for remote code execution and those executables, they'll just release Windows Defender signatures. So they still have a long ways to go. But where they were from the 90s and early 2000s to now is vastly different based on security research.
Yeah, when you talk about like having to think about the impact of the general populace when releasing a tool, I know people that have written tools and purposely not release them because like one of them had to do with I swear it was something with TLS, and the tool that they would release would have put a lot of lives in danger when it comes to people in like more controlled countries like Egypt or whatever. And I think in those kind of niche cases, I think that's probably a good idea, but I think that's kind of a case by case.
We saw that with I think Meat Pistol came up a couple years ago. Autosploit was supposed to be the end of all pen testing. Oh, you kids and your Autosploits. I used to have to create my payloads myself by my hand. We heard that stuff. We heard a lot of wailing and gnashing there. And that was part one of our discussion with Dave Kennedy on offensive tools, release or not. Next week, we go through a few more examples of offensive tools, some that may or may not, in our opinion, should have been released, or, what people think about releasing tools before they actually release them. And then we talk about DerbyCom, the nonprofit organization that Dave set up to extend the DerbyCom spirit and his gaming and esport center at his in his hometown. So it'll be a great little discussion. Hope everyone gets to hear it. You can find Dave on Twitter at HackingDave. You can find Miss Berlin at InfoSyster, INFOSYSTIR. Mr. Betcher, you can find him at BetcherPwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. And the podcast, you can find it at BreakSec, and you can find me on Twitter at BrianBreak. If you're interested in joining our Slack, we have a book club going on. We have CTF club every Saturday. We also have a SIEM club where if you're wanting to discuss, setting up Yara rules, or, finding IOCs in your log files, or learning how to hunt threats, we have that going on, and you can join our Slack and hang out and talk to like-minded individuals. You can get that by sending us a DM to our Twitter, BreakSec, or you can send us an email to bds.podcast@gmail.com. We're on pretty much every podcast platform you could find. We're also at breakingsecurity.com. That's BRAKEING security.com. iHeartRadio, Google Play Store, iTunes. All of these platforms often ask for feedback about podcasts. And if you could just spend 30 seconds telling them, hey, they're a great podcast, or, hey, maybe they're not such a great podcast. We take all kinds of feedback. That will get us more, that'll allow us to rise to the top in all the searches and give us more listens. And it's as good as gold. We also appreciate all of our Patreon fans for giving us a little something in the tip jar every month. Every dollar is used for Zoom accounts. It's used to do hosting. It's for domain registration. It's for just the time and effort of building community and editing a podcast every week. So we appreciate everybody who does that. If you're interested, you can check out breaksec.com/BDS Patreon. So you can check that out. All right, that was it for the week. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on any of the previously mentioned social media platforms. Otherwise, take care of yourselves, be kind to one another, and take care of yourselves because you're only who you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.